Hello, gorgeous pagan people. My name is Eric, and welcome to Wednesday of Subs Week here on the Pagan Perspective. Our question this week comes to us from Wild Silverwolf, who asks, so this was something I saw on one of your other posts, and I wanted to second it. Pagan parenting for new parents. Those who have started out solitary with or without their spouse, and now have small children and would like to include them in their practice / help their child build their own practice. Kids have imaginary friends. Would you include those in the child's practice? Books are always the go-to when people ask for advice. Any YouTubers to look up, any websites, any info would be interesting and welcomed. If you were raised pagan, how was that? What do you remember? If you found it later in life, what do you wish you would have learned at an earlier age? Do you feel that you would have been on the same path that you are now? So I guess let me just preface this conversation by saying I don't have kids and have no intention of ever having any, and I'm very reluctant to tell people how to parent because there's just way too much nuance around it for me to have even the slightest, faintest clue what any individual should do with their child. That said, I think this is a really worthwhile conversation to have, so let me just throw some spaghetti at the wall, and our viewers, who are parents, might be able to decide if any of it should stick. Most of what I want to talk about here comes from my work with my inner child, and the process I've taken in self-parenting as an adult. Most of these ideas came to me secondhand, but they were originally from the book Spiritual Intelligence by Dana Zohar and Ian Marshall. I know Wild was asking for something that wasn't a book, but this is an awesome academic resource and definitely worth considering to look at. Basically, though, they put forward the idea that when rearing children, our jobs as families and as a society is to enrich them in 3 areas of thinking or emotion or intelligence. And that is rational, emotional, and spiritual intelligence. And spiritual models are actually really important to a child's development, and having access to some sort of religious framework can really help a child in developing in that area. Zohar and Marshall define spiritual intelligence as the intelligence with which we address and solve problems of meaning and value, the intelligence with which we can place our actions and our lives in a wider, richer, meaning-giving context, the intelligence with which we can assess that one course of action or one life path is more meaningful than another. It's about teaching children interconnectedness, about how to relate to other people and to other non-human life forms with compassion. It's about equipping them with the ability to answer the existential questions of why and what if to achieve self-actualization. I don't think there's any denying that spiritual and religious education is largely lacking, at least in most English-speaking countries I'm aware of, and I think that, the best thing a parent could do is just expose their child to a large number of faiths and practices. This week we're going to go and play with the Baptists, and next week we'll do meditation at the Taoist temple, and while we're on holiday in Japan, let's stop into some Shinto shrines. Just making sure that your child has the most variety that they can, and seeing how many different options there are, and so that they can make the educated choice about what they want to do. I think as well, it's probably a good idea to have someone in a priesthood perform a divination for your child, to see what tradition would best fit them and what role they would be expected to have in that tradition. I think I've heard of this in Haitian voodoo and other ATRs where a baby would have their spiritual court divined and what role, if any, they'll have in the priesthood. I also vaguely remember a Babalawo telling me that he'd witnessed a reading where the baby's destiny was to practice Islam, while their parents followed Ifa. So we really need to give young people the space to find their own paths and their own way of doing things, but also having a model that you can sit in to help them answer those hard questions. I wasn't raised in the tradition that I practice now. I was brought up by an atheist father and a casually spiritualist mother. So we always had tarot cards around, and I knew that being dead wouldn't stop family from coming to visit. But my mother was not dogmatic at all, and totally supportive of my joining a Wiccan coven and now practicing Haitian voodoo. But she was always prepared to engage in those conversations and tell me what her perspective was. Personally, I think I would have benefited from some sort of ritual practice, though, something with more structure and form to it. But I wonder if, like, high church had been part of my childhood, if I would be as much of a zealot as I am now, because ritual was always foreign and exciting to me, and maybe if I grew up with it, it'd be less shiny. Maybe, or maybe I'm just like this. On the topic of imaginary friends, I think we need to kind of be careful here. We don't want to like foster delusion in children, but maybe divination would be a useful tool here as well. Like, is this actually a familiar spirit, a guide? Is it a past ancestor? Is this just the imaginings and fantasies of a child? I guess it depends as well what value you place in the imaginal realms. Like, if the imagined is just as important as consensus reality, then maybe it would make complete sense to incorporate them. I'm not really sure on this one. Some of my familiars have been with me since I was like 11, and at the time they would have totally been considered like imaginary friends, but they're still with me all this time later, so maybe it's a case by case basis, and that's a bit of a cop out. But Wild also asks what I wish I'd known when I was younger. I definitely wish I'd known that I was called to voodoo earlier. I first engaged with it at 17 and was mostly put off because of a bad experience with a particular mumbo. I kind of feel like even in the last 10 years, I could have learned so much if I'd known that was where I was meant to be. And I do kind of feel now like I'm playing catch up a little bit. But I just have to remind myself, like, this is not a race, Eric. As I said, though, I'm not a parent myself, and am basically talking out of my ass. So if you guys have any thoughts, if you're parents and you want to leave some opinions or thoughts on what I said, or other resources, drop them in the comments of the video, definitely. And I guess, until I speak to you next time, I hope that you guys are all well. Mwah! Bye!